Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tim Landwehr, Tight Lines Fly Fishing Company. Got some pretty exciting news that I get to share with you today. Go back a couple of months ago, I had the great pleasure of doing a podcast with Tom Rosenbauer with Orbis. And Tom and I talked about everything from the modern techniques and stuff in smallmouth fishing that we've used and utilized in the book that we wrote here on smallmouth bass. And we discussed all the details of it. One of the things he also asked me about was fly lines. And we kind of went deep down that rabbit hole of fly lines with him about it. And he said, well, what are you guys using? And traditionally, we have all been using, some of the standard bass bug tapers that are out there. Scientific Anglers does their standard bass bug taper here, which is an awesome all-around bass line. But we have to also remember it's 2 line sizes bigger than what it says on the box. So this one here is an 8. It really is grain weight of closer to a 10 on something like that. So it's a great line, but what we find with it is it'll throw everything. It'll throw giant game changers. It'll throw big crayfish patterns. It'll throw any of that stuff incredibly well. It'll still throw top water and everything else, obviously, well. But because how the line is designed, it goes from a very fine running line into an extremely big head front taper. And a lot of people love this because they cast the rod, they can feel the rod load deep because of the extra weight on the line and deliver the fly to the target. But I was talking to Tom, I said, it's a great line and it's referred to as a bass taper, but it's a fairly generic terminology because it's for largemouth, for smallmouth, for everything in between. But I said, in some of the chapters on our book where we discuss like the wiggly bite, finesse fishing for poppers, passively feeding fish on shelves, things like that, the line is just too big. And what I mean by that is when that's going to hit the water, it's going to explode. You're not going to have the control because it does not have a real long rear taper to it for line control. It's designed to get the job done pretty quickly and efficiently, but not with great amount of control, because of how its taper is by nature. So we started to talk about it and said, well, what lines do you use? And what it boiled down to is a lot of our guides were using more traditional line weight to grain weight stuff. In fact, like Scientific Anglers Infinity line, which is not that much larger than what its line to grain weight is designated as. And we all love that, especially for the wiggly bite, for poppers, for things like that. And more than anything, to be able to carry a tremendous amount of line in the air and deliver it accurately with precision to a target. And he said, well, that's pretty interesting. And, we agreed on that. And a couple days later, Brad Beefus, my very good friend at Scientific Anglers, called me and he said, Tim, I listened to the podcast with you and Tom, and I want to put together a line that is designed specifically for what you're talking about. So that was really exciting. So Scientific Anglers started to send us prototypes to Nate, Bart, myself, many prototypes, lots of different designs, some of them with a bigger triangle taper in the head of this thing. We all still found that it was a little explosive and didn't have the carrying power that we were looking at. So we kind of settled on we really love how the Infinity casts. But the problem with the Infinity was we need it to be a little bit stiffer than it was. And they make 2 different variations in this. They make a saltwater version and they make their standard freshwater version. The saltwater version has a monofilament core, which is great for the salt. But if the temperature is a little bit cooler, here in Wisconsin, northeastern Wisconsin, it could be 50 degrees, 40 degrees in August sometimes, it just gets a little coily. The handling line gets too coily on it. So what they did is they put a very hard coating on this line. So what we now have is the absolute perfect line for finesse fishing for smallmouth bass on these flats. We talk about the wigglies in one of the chapters of our book, and the bass bug is too explosive and hard to gain a whole lot of accuracy with that line. But now with the new Amplitude Smooth Infinity Warm, it solved all of it. Now, when the line first came out, Brad and I went through lines, and it was going to be called the Selective Bass, which I love. I think that's perfect. This summarizes exactly what this particular line is focused on: finesse bass fishing. Is it a beginner line? Nope. Is this going to be the line that, like, if you're just a moderate caster and you're looking for a bass bug line? It's probably not that. It's the line in addition to for this specific style of fishing, which I think was pretty interesting, because all of us will have no problem bringing a second rod in the boat with a sink tip or something like that, for minnows with a shorter leader on it, fishing bait fish, stuff like that. But none of us have brought like two floating lines typically, which is pretty funny, because they both have two different applications. So now in the summer months, what you're going to find in my boat, you're going to find a bass bug taper, especially somebody struggling with casting, can't feel the line load. Like, this is money. We'll throw anything out there. We'll get the job done. But when I'm hunting big fish, and when I'm looking for these passively feeding fish on rock flats where I need to air that out, keep control with that long rear taper on it, where I can mend that bug without disturbing it too much. I can bend their legs, doesn't just explode the bug every single time. That's what this line is designed for. So when we talked about the name Selective Smallmouth, I also realized that there's so many other applications for this line. Some of the guys out west that are fishing hoppers, hopper dropper rigs, stuff like that, where air temperature, especially in the bottom of the boat, it's warm, they need that harder coating. Like, this is the perfect line for it. So they settled on the name Infinity Warm. So it just broadcasts that to a much larger market, because the line has a lot of incredible applications. The one thing I wouldn't settle on was the name. I thought that this was important. The name on this line, for all of you smallmouth junkies, is Mist Green, Bronze, and Tannic for our river tannins. So I told Brad, I said, we got to name it that, because that's just super cool for our smallmouth guys. But it's an incredible line. It's one of those lines that's going to kind of revolutionize and keep pushing that game of the wiggly bite, passively feeding fish for casters looking for that precision and accuracy. This is the line for that. So very excited to be part of it. Very excited to have them in the shop. These are hot off the press. You can get them at tightlinesflyshop.com. We will have them in stock. I've had samples in my boats with customers not knowing what it was and loving it and enjoying it already early this season. And get them now. We still have some great topwater fishing going on, and excited to be part of the project.